Hello listeners, we are your co-hosts Janine Bailey and Marie Quigley for the Empower World Coaching and Leadership Podcast. Empower World brings guests who are making a difference to the world to inspire coaches and leaders who lead with mind, heart and soul. Good morning and welcome listeners to another episode of the Coaching and Leadership Podcast. And I'm delighted to be here this morning with our guest, Clare Norman, who is the author of Cultivating Coachability and the founder of Clare Norman Coaching Associates. Welcome, Clare.
Thank you so much, Marie. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. I'll do a little bit of an intro to you, Clare, because you've got such a fascinating journey. And of course, you might want to add a little bit more than what I know about you. So I know you're a master certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. You're a mentor coach. You're a certified coach supervisor. You've got a master's in training, and I know you've won multiple awards for groundbreaking leadership development. And I believe for the past 25 years, your focus is about maximizing individual and teams' effectiveness, and organizations included in that. You're already an author, of course. You wrote The Transformational Coach in 2022 and Mentor Coaching, a Practical Guide in 2020. So you are a busy lady, Clare.
Yeah, busy writing all the time, it seems. I do love writing. It's one of the things that gives me a lot of joy and a lot of learning for myself as well. As I think most writers say, I figure out what I believe in and know by actually writing for the benefit of other people.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Have you always written, or is it something that's developed as you've kind of moved along in your career, your journey?
Well, so the backstory to that is that my English teacher didn't think that I was very good and didn't think I should do I would do very well in my English O-level. So I didn't believe that I could write. And then when I was in Accenture, one of my colleagues encouraged me to start blogging, and this was really before blogging was a thing. And so I started to cut my teeth writing for this internal blog, which ended up being followed by a lot of people, a high percentage of people in the organization, because they were so interested in this thing called coaching that I was writing about. And so that would have been, I don't know, 17 years ago, something like that I started blogging. And then it just snowballed from there, really. But that's what I say has developed my voice, was being able to have that opportunity to blog got me really comfortable and confident that I had something to say and that people wanted to read it. And so when I became independent, I had no qualms about writing on LinkedIn, for example. I know some people just can't stand the thought of that, but I was already believing in myself and my own voice. I had developed that voice by that point.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And perhaps it's a whole nother podcast on how we move from being able to speak about what we love into putting it down into words, and even on the LinkedIn or a blog, and the transition of moving from that to a book. Because for a lot of people, that's a very daunting prospect to actually consolidate their knowledge in this little package. And your books are beautiful little packages as well. So perhaps that is something we could talk about in another podcast.
Sure. Yes, I'd be happy to.
So cultivating coachability. What inspired you to write that?
So it emanated from a conversation that I had at the book launch for The Transformational Coach. I was talking to one of the people I'd invited to that. She was a coaching custodian within an organization. And I should explain that word. Coaching custodian is the word that I use to describe the person or people in an organization who is responsible for making coaching a success in that organization. So she said to me, Claire, now that you've written this book, The Transformational Coach, which is all about how coaches need to be instead of do, and shift their mindsets. She said, I think you now need to write another book for the thinker, as I call them, and how they can be the best they can be when they come into coaching. And I thought about that and I was like, well, actually, there isn't a market for that. They're not going to buy it because actually they want their coach to help them to become a better thinker. That is the whole point of coaching. So I came back around to the idea of, okay, so what can I write for coaches that's going to help them to cultivate coachability in the people that they work with? And then as I started to write, I realized that there's actually these two things. There is coaching readiness and then there's coachability. So coachability is the bit when you've decided you are going to work together, and that's how do we draw out their coachability, their thinking, building their thinking muscles. But the coaching readiness is the bit that I think that we have missed massively. I know we have chemistry calls, but we try and fit everything but the kitchen sink into a chemistry call, and it doesn't check out for coaching readiness, and we miss signs and signals if we don't take a step back from there and figure out what can we as coaches expect from the coaching custodian to have done before we even get involved. So that's long way of describing what got me into writing this book.
I love this. And I'm thinking, so many images flew into my head about my own experiences with coachability and coaching readiness with my clients, Claire. It's fascinating to think that as new coaches, we may not even realize that that's a thing because it isn't talked about.
Right.
Training and that type of thing. But I remember working with one client and being the first person in the room and him walking in and absolutely not knowing why he was even there, never mind who I was.
Yes.
And that was a huge lesson for me to speak to the custodians, the shareholders, the HR department, to explain the process of what needs to happen before I ever get in a room to have a chemistry call or a meeting with someone to see if I'm the right fit for them. This person was really terrified because he was from a different culture. He was not sure what he was expecting. And there had to be a lot of trust and connection happening in a very few short minutes for us to be able to have a conversation about the possibility of working with a coach and what that meant.
Yeah.
Luckily, we were able to build that. But had we not been, and of course, I had to go back to HR and explain that the process of getting a client ready is essential, absolutely essential.
Yeah. And I think because this role of coaching custodian often falls to an HR leader who, it's just a small part of their job. They've got massive jobs to do, and they don't get why that's important. I mean, why would they? Nobody has ever taught the coaching custodian. Maybe if they have trained themselves as a coach, they might have an inkling, but still, as you said, I don't think it gets covered in training about how the coaching custodian can set up coaching for success. And, this applies to coaching platforms these days as well, and associateships. And what is it that all three of those styles of coaching custodian are doing or not doing to set up coaching for success? It's putting an awful lot of pressure on the coach if that doesn't happen up front. It puts an awful lot of pressure on the thinker who comes into that room, like your example there. And of course, if they are anxious and worried, they can't do their best thinking. There's all these chemicals flooded around their body that mean they can't think well. And so the role of the coaching custodian is to make sure that coaching is the best fit intervention for whatever it is, the presenting issue, that the timing is right for this individual, that the individual understands what coaching is and is not, and how to make the most of it, and is actually motivated to make the most of it. They have to want what coaching will give them and what it will expect of them, which is for them to do the hard work of thinking and exploring and sensing. So too many people come into this coaching room expecting something other than what we offer. And then we get sucked in and we start to think, oh, I've got to add more value in their eyes. You know, they're expecting mentoring or consulting, so I'd better do that. Well, you've trained as a coach. So and as coaches, we have bought into and hopefully believe that the client is creative, resourceful, and whole. But as soon as we get hooked into their invitation to mentoring or consulting, because that's what they think coaching is, and they don't realize what coaching could give them if they understood what it was. As soon as we get hooked into that, then we're actually minimizing the value that we could bring to them. So we're so keen to add value, and yet we're minimizing the value by getting hooked into that. And this is all because a person has come into this coaching room not really knowing what it is or how to make the most of it. And some coaches will say, well, that's what I do in the chemistry session. Or generally, we have about 45 minutes to an hour in a chemistry session. And when I've asked coaches and coaching custodians how many things they expect to cover in that 45 minutes, there's about 30 different things. You can't cover all 30 of those well. So how about some of those 30 things get done before you have a chemistry session, or what I'm now choosing to call a compatibility session, because then you can you refine actually what you're doing in that compatibility call. And you're doing less, but you're doing it much, much better because all of the other 25 things have been done ahead of time. And this person is coming into this room knowing exactly, well, they haven't experienced coaching yet. So they might have heard what coaching is. They might still try and hook you in, but at least that conversation has happened once with a coaching custodian about what this thing called coaching is and how they can make the most of it, and how they need to partner with their coach to make sure they get the most out of it. That it's a very adult to adult kind of conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Claire. And I think that the compatibility session, in your words, the chemistry session, the sample session, however you want to describe it, is just the beginning. Because I do think even in an hour's call, the what is coaching needs to be developed as you develop your partnership. And the contracting and recontracting about what it is and what it isn't is part of the journey of exploration as well. And you mentioned leaving 25 things out and doing it before and concentrating on perhaps five things, Claire. What would you say are the top 5 things we should be concentrating on this compatibility call?
Well, so assuming that the coaching custodian has checked that coaching is the best fit intervention, it's the best time, that this person is motivated, and that they have the support of their manager. If all of those things have been done, then a compatibility call is purely about, does my kind of support match with the way that this person learns and thinks? Do we see a good connection there? Do we see a good connection between the kind of challenge I might bring to them and how that might stretch them out of their comfort zone? Is my challenge just enough, as we would say in the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, kind of just enough to get them out of their comfort zone? It's not so much that it's going to stress them, but also it's not too little that it's going to keep us in this cozy corner. So does my level of support match what they need? Does my type of challenge match, or is that going to stretch them enough, but not too much? And then we're also looking at, again, checking in on coaching readiness of the individual. Do they really want this? Now that, having a conversation with me and me describing it again, how it's going, how it works, and how they can make the most of it. So we're checking in again for a second time to make sure that they know what they're letting themselves in for. And then the last thing is whether there are any conflicts of interest. So is there a reason why we shouldn't be working together because I'm already coaching, let's say, their boss, and we're not sure that we can keep the Chinese walls clean, for example. So those are the four things that I would say.
Yeah. I'm thinking about our philosophy of coaching. So recently had a connection call, a chemistry call, and helping the person understand that the way I work is looking internally and looking at patterns of behavior.
Yeah.
And I'm not a coach who's only going to focus on taking action and looking at time management and the strategies to do that. That's not the type of work I do.
Yeah.
So being really clear about your philosophy of coaching and who you are as a coach and the type of work you do, which is also often a little bit confusing for the clients, because they don't know that there is this whole realm and broad spectrum of different types of coaching that can be offered.
Yes, exactly. And so that's the piece about, does my kind of support match up with the way they learn, the way they think, what they want from the coaching? Because, yeah, you're right. But what I'm, the other thing that I would expect of a coaching custodian is that they would know that about me. And they would know too, when they're doing the matching, okay, I think Claire would be a good match for this person because they want to work on whatever. And so the coaching custodian has already made a start on that match to make sure we'd be a good fit. We still need to verify that in the compatibility meeting for sure. But again, it's something else that can happen ahead of time. I don't believe in these beauty parades that happen where a coaching custodian puts an individual in front of three different coaches. Yes, I know there's an argument that gives choice to the individual, but I don't think they are. I don't think they have enough understanding to be able to ask questions of those three different coaches about what's different or similar about them, to be able to make that decision for themselves. So, when I historically have asked, so what are you looking for in a coach? They can't answer that question. And so this is why and also because there is research backing this that says that that chemistry in and of itself is not going to lead to great coaching, because if we are too similar, we will get into collusion. So there is still choice. If the coaching custodian puts one coach in front of the individual, and coach and thinker decide together whether this is a good match. And if either party says no, then the individual would be matched with a second coach until the individual finds the coach that they feel is a good fit. So yeah, there's a lot more to unpack in that, because I know some people would argue differently against that, but that happens to be how I believe we can get the best start in coaching for the individual.
Yeah, but very interesting, because as you say, the common thinking is let's have a number of coaches on hand to explore who could be the best fit. I also do think that the coach needs to be at choice as well as the client.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's really important to be able to say, actually, I don't believe I'm the right fit for you, and I recommend you to look somewhere else to get the best out of it. And this isn't just about philosophy on coaching. This is about the ability to challenge, or the area of growth that the client wants to work on. It might not be the type of work I want to do, and I think there's huge courage in saying no, I'm not the right coach, because when we do that, another door can open for the right client to come in the space for us.
And unfortunately, credentialing, the expectations of credentialing drive us to get more hours, and therefore to take anything that comes our way so that we can get the next level of credential. And the other driver, of course, is financial. We all need to make a living, and so we are drawn into accepting matches that we have this little inkling this isn't going to work out, but we accept it anyway. And then actually we find that we're spending so much more time in between sessions worrying about this just doesn't seem to be working. How am I going to work with this individual? They maybe triggered us somehow. We're having to pay to take it to supervision because we need to unpack it. So we're actually spending a lot more money than we're earning, either on our own worry time or on taking it to supervision to figure out how to work with this person. So yeah, I think we have to kind of extract the money driver and the hours driver from our decision-making process and really make it as clean as we can as human beings, a cleaner decision about, is this the kind of coaching I want to be doing, the kind of person I want to be working with, the kind of industry I want to work in, etc.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate that. And again, I'm thinking of a client that we agreed to work with each other. There was a little inkling in me that maybe they aren't going to be able to want to do the work. And we had our chemistry call. We sent out our getting to know you documents. We signed the contract. And the pre-work that they had to do, it didn't happen. And the sessions kept being pushed for the first session. And I realized, and this was about 10 years ago, I realized they're not ready. They are really not ready to do this work. And when they finally came and sat in front of me, I said, I've got this sensation that you might not be ready. And she took a breath and she said, no, I'm not ready. Gosh, it feels so freeing to say I'm not ready. So she went away, and she actually came back 3 years later and said, oh, I'm ready. And it was such a great thing for our partnership 3 years down the line, because we'd been able to be so honest with each other at the beginning. let's say my driver was building my business, so I'm going to take her, even though this feeling was happening inside me. But the courage to say or to state what was happening helped us have a brilliant partnership later on. So I think that's important to think about too.
Yeah, and courage is so important, I think, with all of what I'm talking about here. The courage to say no, the courage to have conversations with the coaching custodian about our expectations of or our needs from them, or however we want to position that, how they can get the best out of the coaching for their organization.
Yeah.
The courage to break off a relationship partway through when it's not working. The courage to be the first to say, this isn't working. What do we need to put in place to allow it to work? Or do we call it quits? So I agree, there's a lot of courage that we need to display in all of those kinds of conversations. Well, I know I have had to steel myself and get courageous with that. Some people might find that easier than I have done historically, but I think a lot about having these kinds of conversations that are new to us because we've never done them before. Of course, they're going to take courage. They're new. We don't know how that's going to go. We may not be able to quite find the words. But the more times we have those kinds of conversations, the less courage we need, because it becomes part of, okay, this is how I work in a relational kind of way that enables me to say what I'm sensing, for example, in your case. And actually, for that to have been her stuff, she was the one who wasn't ready, but not, she couldn't articulate that, presumably. Or she didn't have the courage to articulate it, even if she did know it. And so it helped to have her coach have that courage to say it.
Yeah, I think we've got to pay attention to the system, pay attention to what's happening all around us, pay attention to our own system,
Yeah.
and start to get curious about it. I mean, that's the power of supervision or self-reflection, isn't it? To be able to take the time to think about our work and notice when things are off, or even if it's just a sense of something that doesn't feel right, giving it the attention it deserves so that we can have braver conversations.
Yes. Even to say, something's not quite right here. I don't know what it is. Can we talk about it?
Yeah.
Because then together we can figure it out. We don't have to know. We just need to be brave enough to say something's not quite right.
Yeah. And just thinking about having a conversation in supervision with a very brave, very courageous coach. He's formidable in his work. He's brilliant in his field. And he knew something wasn't quite right with a couple of partnerships that he had, and you realize that recontracting, but in a gentle yet courageous way, really changed the dynamics for the partnership.
Yeah.
And it's that we don't have to be aggressive with it. It's how we turn up. Who we are is how we coach. Who we are is also how we contract with somebody to have tough conversations.
Yes. Yes, definitely. It all comes back to the contract every time.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And that sparked another thought, which has quickly floated out of my head. It'll come back in a minute.
It will indeed. So let's take that step back to the coaching custodian and think about if we've let some stuff out of our chemistry call, our compatibility call, what does the custodian need to think about in terms of getting that thinker client ready for the work?
Yeah. So first things first is not to take it as read that when a line manager comes to the coaching custodian and says, oh, I need some coaching for Joe Blogs. Can you sort that out, please? There needs to be a conversation there to start with. because it may be, and this isn't always the case, but it may be that line manager is trying to abdicate their own responsibility for performance management. So we need to check that is not happening, and it's not actually the line manager who needs support rather than the individual. The coaching custodian would also be checking, well, has this individual had training that will support them with whatever it is that they're trying to figure out? Because sometimes it's a training issue, not a coaching issue. We know that people mix up the word coaching with training. They're not the same thing, as we know as coaches. It could be that an on-the-job challenge might be what this individual needs with feedback. So that's the first thing that the coaching custodian needs to check is coaching really the right thing, or the best fit thing, or the only thing? Because it may be alongside something else. It doesn't have to be either or, it could be alongside. So that's the first thing. If that test, I suppose, has been met, then the next question, or the next thing I would expect of the coaching custodian, would be to have a conversation with the individual, perhaps in conjunction with the line manager, to talk through what is this thing. So we talk about three-way contracting, but actually perhaps there's a three-way conversation that needs to happen at that point as well. Because again, quite often the individual hasn't heard stuff from their line manager that their line manager has told HR, or might well tell the coach if we allowed that to happen. So the individual needs to understand, if they're not the one asking for coaching, what is this all about? What are we going? What are we aiming for here for the business? So there's that conversation there, and then checking in with the individual. Is this the right time? Because they may have all sorts of other stuff going on in their life. Maybe a new father, or not saying new fathers don't need coaching, by the way, but perhaps there's just so much that new father is trying to juggle at that point in time and doesn't feel ready. Or maybe there's an organizational change around the corner that the individual doesn't actually know about yet, but HR knows about this organizational change. So is the timing right from an organizational change perspective? And if they are in the midst of some big change, we know that coaching is good in the eye of the storm. And sometimes it can be just too much, the straw that broke the camel's back. So we need to or the coaching custodian needs to make a judgment call with the thinker about, is this the right timing? And then they would also need to be having the conversation with the individual about, and this is what it is. This is what it isn't. This is how you make the most of it. So they're checking in that the thinker is prepared to go for this, that they actually want it. So again, too many times we have people showing up to coaching who don't know what it is, or even if they do know what it is, they don't want it. They've been sent to coaching, they're not volunteering. And we know it doesn't work if they don't really want to be there. They'll be kicking and screaming, not necessarily outwardly, but inwardly. So that's another part of that conversation. So all these multiple facets, and the coaching custodian might be thinking, oh my goodness, that's a lot that I have to do. And yes, it is. It's this conversational, relational stuff. It's not throwing coaching over the fence to the coach to deal with. It's making sure that this is the right thing before that compatibility call.
Yeah. And it is an investment. And so, yeah, it's not just an investment of money, it's an investment of resources, etc. So you want the best out of it, don't you?
Yes. And I think there is so much drive for efficiency these days that somehow that the responsibility for making sure this is a wise investment has fallen too much onto the coach's shoulders in recent years and not enough on the organisation, the coaching custodian as the representative of the organisation, to make sure that this is going to be a good investment, the right thing at the right time with the right person, etc.
Yeah. I've had two amazing experiences with two organizations, very different organizations recently. And what they've agreed to, on my suggestion, is that we have a three-way, actually a four-way conversation in person. So we've got the line manager, we've got the HR, head of HR, we've got the client, and we've got me. And we're having a discussion about the outcomes of coaching and challenges and opportunities from all of these perspectives. And to me, that's a really good way to ensure even more success, even stronger success. Yes. When, as a coach, I can be brave in my questioning to the line manager and HR manager, as well as my client or thinker, to look at what are we going to do together? Because this is a partnership. This isn't just a two-way thing.
Yes.
I know that that's really been essential in the success of the program.
Yes. And quite often line managers think, oh, well, that's okay. I could just pass it all off to the coach now. The coach can work on this. No, you are there with this individual every day, or if not every day, at least more often than the coach is. So you have line management responsibilities. That is different from the responsibility of a coach. So step up, line manager, to take on that responsibility. I know they are under so much pressure to achieve and drive and manage tasks to their end point, that actually this people side of things often falls to the bottom of the pile. So I don't blame the line manager entirely, because it is part of the system that they're working in. But this is their responsibility. It is what they're paid for, to do their part in this whole system of developing this individual. And then whatever other roles, stakeholder roles, are part of that. And I think, you said earlier about if you have an inkling that something in that four-way conversation isn't being said, I think we have to be the ones who say, I get the sense something is not being aired in this room. I want, what is that? What's not being said? Because if we don't call it out, they're not going to call it out. They're wanting to squash it, whatever it is that they don't want to say, because it might feel difficult to say it, or they might fear their relationship with that individual afterwards. But it's important that we know the unstated stuff, because once we start working one-to-one with the individual, we may never get that chance again to find out what the unstated thing is.
So you say line managers need to step up. As coaches, we need to step up too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I talk about taking charge of ourselves as a coach, not taking charge of the coaching, but we need to kind of really own ourselves as coaching professionals and ask challenging questions from the get-go, so that we can have a wider systems view to help the client. Because, one of the things I often say is coaching can reveal that this person might be in the wrong position or wrong role. So it might create a shift that they're moving out rather than staying in and growing. So all of these things need to be talked about from
Yeah, definitely. I'm with you on that. We need to step into our power.
Yeah.
And power with, not power over, but power with. We are being paid to do this wonderful job that we love doing. And it does mean that we are working with the whole system and need to understand that whole system. And actually that reminds me of something else that I would expect from the coaching custodian, which would be a proper briefing. So often I think there's a quick email from the coaching custodian to say, got this person, they need some coaching on blah. Can you have a conversation with them? Okay, so what's the brief here? Have you done all those other things that need to be done? Is this person coaching ready? Is it the right time, etc., etc.? But also, what's the context of what's happening in the organization that I, as the coach, need to know in order to be able to take a systemic lens with this individual? And I think through efficiency drivers, that doesn't happen as often unless we, as the coach, demand it. So yeah, be more demanding. Keeps coming back into my head all the time.
Well, I'm going back to your second book, Claire, the transformational coaching, where you talk about unlearning.
Yes.
And I think that's a thing as coaches, we often have to unlearn that being kind and considerate, well, yes, we have to be that, but we also have to be demanding for the sake of the client, for the sake of the success of the program. We also have to be really clear and considered and keeping things really transparent. That's a word I like to use. Be as transparent as possible about the process. And I think if we do that, we tend to model that for the system that we're working in. The more transparent I am, the more transparent and courageous the leader is, or the HR manager, and therefore the client's going to be. So those unlearnings that we might have learned in coach training, or being a good girl, or not causing upset to people, and building our business, we've got to take everything we can. We've got to unlearn some of those practices.
Yeah.
Because it actually for me is counterintuitive to building a really good practice.
Yes, I'm absolutely with you 100% there. And questioning all these things that we have taken on board over the course of our lifetimes that are not serving the people that we are working with. And if we simply glide into coaching with these things still crowding the way that we think and the way that we do things, then we're not in best service of the individual that we're working with or their system. There's an awful lot of things we need to unlearn.
And I'm also thinking compassionately to that young coach that started out 20 years ago who didn't know all of these things as me.
Yes.
Has learnt them on the journey and has made lots of mistakes. And I'm also looking out to my coaches that might be in training and thinking, how do we, because we can't know what we don't know until we're experiencing it. And even if we hear it sometimes, it just doesn't make sense to us. It doesn't fit with who we are. So what advice would you give to new coaches coming through that are really trying to do their very best and build their coaching practice?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Because training does focus on teaching us how to run a session, how to get the beautiful arc of a session. And of course it teaches us that, and that's beautiful, and that's Lovely. And that's what we all love to do. And it doesn't necessarily have the time to focus on all of these other things that you and I have learned through experience. And so this is where I would say, and I say it, I don't know how many times in the book, I really ought to count it, but I say, if you're unsure, take it to supervision, because that is the place where we build on our original training. And as we are experiencing things that we're just thinking, oh, I'm not sure about this, this doesn't feel right, or how might I shift the way I'm doing things, or how might I unlearn? What do I need to unlearn? That's all brilliant stuff to take to supervision. And that is what supervision is there for, is to support us through the experiential stuff that we couldn't possibly have taken in, all of that stuff, as you say, in training. It would have been overwhelming, and any number of case studies wouldn't necessarily bring it to life until we have our own case study. We bring that case study to supervision, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, I see. Yeah, so that is the power of supervision.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, there is still, in some parts of the world, a misconception of what supervision is.
Yeah.
And I think you described it there beautifully, where we're bringing our client cases, we're bringing ourselves, who we are in the work that we're doing, and getting curious about it with
Yes.
our supervisor or our peers along with our supervisor.
Yeah.
And it's such a refreshing place to be able to have deep, honest, vulnerable conversations that make us a better coach.
Definitely. Yes. And I do so wish that all parts of the world would embrace that, because this is not policing of the work that coaches do. This is a place of rejuvenation and refreshment and resourcing, re-resourcing, and all the R's. Yeah.
And if we come back to the title of your book, Cultivating Coachability, it's also a way of cultivating ourselves in supervision to be able to do this work that you talk about in your book.
Yes, cultivating courage to be able to do that, cultivating vulnerability, cultivating who am I as a human being, not just as a coach, but as a human being. What do I stand for? That's what we're cultivating. And yeah, I had some wonderful supervision this week for myself, where I suddenly, the penny dropped. Oh, that's what I stand for. So no matter how long we have been in this business for, I am still learning every time I go to supervision about myself and my relationships with the people that I'm working with. So yeah, yes, I love supervision.
Mastery is the pursuit that keeps on going and going and going, right? It's never ending.
Yes, and I thought you were going to say the pursuit that keeps giving and giving and giving, because that's how it feels to me. Mastery is giving me oodles of stuff as a human being.
Wow. I think that's a really lovely place to start wrapping up our coaching conversation, Claire. And what I feel like it's opened lots of lovely other doorways that we should have other conversations about. But for now, if we come back to thinking about our listeners, who I have no doubt have found your thoughts and reflections so interesting, what would you like to leave them with?
Well, the thing that I write inside the book, whenever somebody asks for a signed copy, I write in there, claim your agency, because that's what I'd like coaches to do, is to claim their agency in this whole systemic work that we do, and recognize that how potent their own agency can be in making sure that coaching readiness is addressed. And yes, they can do the coachability piece alongside the individual, but claim your agency.
Super. So, listeners, hopefully you are paying attention, that you start to embody that, you start to bring it to supervision, you start to act out in your coaching work with this, you start talking to stakeholders about this. Claire, how can people who don't already know you, of course, how can they find out about you and where can they connect with you?
Well, I would love for people to send me a LinkedIn request, Clare Norman MCC. That would be the first place to go. I post all sorts of my thinking, my emerging thoughts there almost every day. If people want some more of the same, they can find out about my programs at clarenormancoaching.associates.com. And of course, they can read up more in the book, Cultivating Coachability, that is available at Amazon and all good bookstores.
Fantastic. Claire, as always, it was a pleasure and a wonderful learning experience being with you this morning. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Listeners, if you've enjoyed what you've heard, we'd love you to share, spread the word, talk about this with your peers and connections, even talk about this with your clients and your sponsors that you're working with. Let us know if you want any other conversations like this, different to this. We always appreciate your feedback. So keep listening. And what was your line, Claire? What should they do? Claim
your agency.
Claim your agency. Wishing everyone a good day. Thanks for listening. You can find out more about us on our website, www.empower-world.com, and on our social media networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Be empowered.